Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be responding to the NonCompete video titled, Here's Why Capitalism Sucks, and Why It Needs to End. So just from the title alone, you probably know what they're going to be talking about in this video, and I watched this video a long time ago. It says it was made on April 6, 2018, and because of that, I think I probably watched that around the time when it was published, and I thought it was around the time a good explanation of Marxist theories relating to profit being theft, those sort of things. So I think it'll be interesting for me to respond to it and give some critiques of it, because I think it's a very, you'll see when it starts, it's a very well done video. But the ideas are not very well thought out and very well developed. Well, they're developed well, but they're bad ideas. So yeah, let's jump right into it. I have a decent amount of respect for NonCompete because he is good at explaining these ideas in a very simple form. But I also have not a lot of respect based on the fact that he is necessarily evasive for him to have to come to these sort of ideas. But let's get right into it. So 3, 2, 1, begin.
Capitalism. It's a great thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Capitalism leads to technological advancement,
Hell
economic development, and human freedom. That is, until it doesn't. There's no question that the development of capitalism was a great thing for human society. Unfortunately, over time, capitalism has spun wildly out of control, transforming rapidly from a force for positive social change into a brutal system of oppression that's holding humanity back and destroying billions of lives. To understand.
Oof, that's. I mean, he's right that it lifted people out of poverty and it did all those things, and there's certainly problems with the current system that we have, but I would argue that that is not a capitalist system. We have a lot of government regulation and a lot of problems with that, but the areas that are left free, that's where we see a lot of technological advancement, where we see a lot of improvement in people's standards of living. Now, it's not as if capitalism has led to these immediate jumps either. It hasn't led countries to immediately jump from being a third world country right into development. That's why we see things like child labor and those sort of things, because you have to go through steps, because these children before, they were working on the farms, even harder conditions. But what capitalism does is it takes the children out of these conditions and it gets them into schools, actually. Like that's what capitalism's known for, putting children in child labor, but really what it should be known for is getting children off of the farms and into schools. Now there was a transition period, obviously, and we see that, it's horrible, like seeing all these children working. However, it was a step upward from where they were before. It's really easy for us as very privileged, wealthy people to look down on the kids in China or the kids in the Industrial Revolution and say, oh, you should be in school, or oh, you should be out of poverty already. But no, it comes in steps. You can't just expect technological advancement overnight. And if you do that, you get what happens in communist countries, where they force technological innovation at the cost of the individual, at the cost of every individual's pursuit of happiness, which leads to a lot of destruction. Now, I know NonCompete doesn't endorse those countries, but the industrialization in those countries is very distinct from the industrialization in America and the capitalist countries. That sort of industrialization has been largely through people pursuing their own happiness, while in Soviet Russia and communist countries and socialist countries, it's largely been through force. It's been by preventing people from spending money on what they want to spend it on and diverting it to industrialization, which is destructive. And it's this idea that you need to jump from subsistence farming to high-level industrialization overnight is a damaging idea that leads to a lot of these problems that we see in communist countries. Now, capitalism has led to a lot of technological advancement. It's good that he can at least be honest and see that fact, and can concede that fact. But he's obviously saying, there's other problems that come with it today. And I would argue that a lot of those problems, such as healthcare, education, housing, those sort of things, if we look at each individual field and see where the government's most involved in and where the government's least involved in, we see that housing, medicine, education, those are the most regulated parts of the economy. Those are the parts where the government has its hand in the most out of every other part of the economy. Now, when the government leaves places free, we see things like food, for example, is still very free. or still relatively free. Obviously, you have to pay money for food, but it's still relatively free. It's not perfectly free. There's things with farming and subsidies to farms and those sort of things that I have problems with. But generally, we're not seeing people starve. We're seeing food is very, very developed right now. We see things like GMOs that are basically solving world hunger. We're seeing like the supply chains are very free, and people are not starving anymore. Starvation has been, I mean, obviously there's going to be some off examples, but nowadays people don't starve to death anymore. But that throughout history has been the biggest problem. So capitalism can clearly provide for the things that we need like Medicare, education, housing, those sort of things. Those are all three things that people argue for the government to step in with because it's something that we need. How can people profit off of the things that we need? Well, look at food. Look at what happens when we try to collectivize food as well. I mean, that's when you get things like bread lines and the farms in Cambodia and those sort of things. Now, obviously, nobody's advocating for that, but nobody really can advocate for that because that to advocate for that would take so much obvious evasion of those negative aspects. You have to essentially say, no, I'm not advocating for that, while advocating for the ideas that have always led to those sort of things throughout history. Yeah, but I went all over the place, so let us keep going with this video. We're only 32 seconds in, and I'm already explaining every single problem that's wrong with capitalism and explaining it away. But let's keep going.
To understand why, let's first take a look at the system which preceded capitalism, feudalism.
So this is when you hear people talk about feudalism develops to capitalism, those sort of things. That's basically you know you're going to be listening to a Marxist talk about things, because that's basically Marxist theory. Marxist theory is that like history has sort of, now I'm going to completely butcher it, but basically the Marxist sort of theory is it's developing from feudalism, and then capitalism arises out of feudalism, and then out of capitalism will arise eventually socialism and then communism, which is the utopia where all hierarchies are torn down, and feudalism is like the most hierarchy and capitalism is less hierarchy and those sort of things. But I would argue that the distinction between feudalism and capitalism is the use of force, and this is why capitalism is moral. Feudalism, serfs were forced to work on their farms, forced to work for the kings, forced to work for their lords. But in capitalism, any worker can choose to work for whomever they want to work for. And every individual is free to create whatever business he wants to. And there's a lot of class mobility in capitalism. Now, obviously, it's not as if everybody in the lower class is going to get up to the upper class, because there's going to be a little bit of inequality of opportunity. But what would it mean for us to equalize this opportunity? It would mean to pull some people back. It would mean to pull the rich back, to steal from the wealthy people and give it to the poor people. And I would argue that that is fundamentally immoral, and it is a use of force that is why I have problems with feudalism as well. I think the reason why capitalism is great is because it eliminates the use of force from society. But feudalism, socialism, communism, fascism, all those economic systems, I guess fascism is not much of fascism is kind of an economic system. It's where you privatize things and then have the government regulate and tell those companies what to do. But all those economic systems, they're characterized by force in some regard. Capitalism is characterized by the government's protection of individual rights, including property rights, where all property is privately owned. And that's basically Ayn Rand's definition. And it is basically the government monopolizes force, gets force out of society, and protects individual rights, and lets individuals pursue their lives as they see fit. So let's keep going with the feudalism.
Back in the days of feudalism, society was agrarian. The most important product was food, so the most important means of production were farmlands. At the top of feudal society were the feudal lords who owned the land. At the bottom were the peasants who worked the land. There were other classes too, like the church and merchants and tradespeople like stonemasons and cobblers and coopers. There was friction and conflict between these classes from time to time, but for the most part under feudalism, society was pretty much static for hundreds of years, especially for the peasant class. Under feudal society, if you were born a peasant, you were probably going to die as a peasant. You were essentially the property of your feudal lord, so there wasn't much opportunity for advancement or changing careers. It sucked. The other classes were...
I would agree with that. That is a terrible system. The use of force to suppress the serfs into their basically being owned, as he said, by the feudal lords. So yeah, I'd agree that that's a problem. And what capitalism does is it alleviates that use of force and makes it so that the workers, they can bargain with their employers and decide, okay, if you're not going to offer me the price that I want to work, if you're not going to offer me something that is more valuable than my time, then I'm not going to work for you. And it gives the workers as well, they have the ability to create their own businesses and hire other people as well. So that's what capitalism does. That fixes these problems of feudalism, basically.
Were pretty static too. Noble titles were passed down from father to son, and there were very few opportunities to break into the aristocratic class. Merchants and tradespeople formed powerful guilds to prevent competition and to control access to their professions. Under feudalism, the people in power did their best to restrict and control social mobility. As capitalism began to emerge hand in hand with industrialism, things began to change. Early capitalists gave peasants opportunities they never had before. Now, instead of toiling your life away on a peasant farm for a feudal lord, you could go to work for a capitalist in exchange for wages and try to advance your lot in life. As capitalism progressed, the old social order of feudalism...
And also, an important point here as well is that the peasants, they could create their own businesses as well. The peasants could go and open up like some sort of masonry shop or some sort of anything. I mean, I don't like that's not the best example because I don't know as much about the whatever particularly was going on in the economics at the time, but they could also they could create their own business, or they could earn money, save up money from working for an industrialist, and then go buy some more land and move up in the economic mobility, which is a fundamentally beautiful thing because it places the ability to achieve in the hands of the individual rather than the favors of the lords, the favors of society, the favors of the whoever's in power at the time. So that's a fundamentally beautiful thing. It places the ability to achieve in the hands of the individual, and it makes it so that society cannot suppress that person. Society can't say anything that will push them down and prevent their mind from being fully unlocked and fully able to self-actualize.
Rapidly fell to pieces. Feudal lords were usurped by wealthy capitalists who owned land and factories. The ancient craft guilds found that they couldn't compete with modern industrial production, and the newly formed working class developed a degree of social mobility as they could move from job to job trying to seek higher wages. This all sounds pretty great, right? Well, it was for a while. Unfortunately, the good times did not last. Over time, capitalist processes lead to increasing economic instability, inequality, and societal destruction. To understand why, let's take a look at how capitalism functions.
So, I mean, they're going to do the sort of inequality thing, but here's the thing. Basically what happens in capitalism obviously raises everyone's standard of living from what we've explained, like the sort of the greater production, the lower prices, all these sort of things. Anybody can go get a job that they want. Anybody has social mobility, has the ability to pursue their own values and make judgments about their own life and sell their own labor in win-win transactions for the point where it's like where the money they get from their labor is more valuable than their time. So all these sort of things make it so that capitalism is a good system, and it raises even the poor standard of living. It raises everybody's standard of living. Now, obviously, it's going to raise certain people's standard of living higher than other people's. It's going to be the people that produce the things. It's going to be the most productive people, the people who make the most profit. Now, it's not always going to be the most productive people, but the freer the society, the more likely it is that it's merit-based. Because when individuals are free to go to the store, buy whatever they want, and produce whatever they want, all those sort of things, when the government's not forcing and distorting the market in any sort of way, generally the most productive will rise to the top, and they will gain wealth at an unequal rate compared to the other people. So there will be sort of a developing gap. But the issue here is, or the thing here is, the lower class, their standard of living is also raising over what it would have been if capitalism didn't come into place. Now, the productive people, the industrialists, their standard of living is raising faster than the lower class people. So as they raise faster and they raise slower, you see this sort of gap developing in the incomes of these people. So this is what income inequality is. And I would argue that there is no real problem with this because everybody's standard of living is increasing. And as long as there's no government force involved in it, as long as the market's not being distorted in any way, then it generally rewards the people who are most productive with profits, with beneficial things. So let us keep going with this video.
Under capitalism, all of the old classes of lords and peasants and craftsmen and merchants have been swept away. Now there are basically just two major classes. the capitalists who own the means of production, the factories and farms and other businesses of the world, and the workers who perform the labor that keeps the wheat.
This is not true at all. I mean, capitalism led to a booming of the middle class. The middle class didn't really exist that much before capitalism. Sure, there were, like, as he mentioned earlier, there's like the artisans, the whatever, all that other stuff that he was talking about earlier on in the video, like the masons, those sort of people, the shoemakers, all those people. Like, that was the original sort of middle class in feudal Europe, but that was not very prosperous. There were not that many people in that class. But what capitalism has allowed is for this new prospering middle class, where you have all these new jobs that get popped up and all these new, all these new jobs that popped up and that are a lot more wealthy, that gain people a lot more wealth, and then you have the middle class sort of emerge out of capitalism. So it's not true at all to say that it's basically workers and capitalists now. Once capitalism came up, the middle class became a thing really under capitalism. There wasn't really there. It was basically, before it was serfs and lords. But now that capitalism's here, now we have a middle class. Now we have upward mobility. And now there's not this like direct distinction between two groups. It's sort of a continuum based off of your productivity, based on what you do. Nowadays there's a distinction between sort of the people who use government force to move ahead, the parasites, the moochers, those sort of people, and the people who achieve by their own merit. And the people who achieve by their own merit can often be pushed behind by the people who use force. This is through taxation, through a lot of market distortions. These people get pushed behind. So we ultimately, in the modern day, in the mixed economy, we see a lot of people who should be productive, who should be at the top of society, getting left behind. And that's a major problem, I would argue. But the real solution to this is to free up the economy and stop the people from distorting the economy and stop the people from mooching off of the productive people. Let's keep going with this.
Wheels of the economy turning. Capitalists not only own the means of production, but they also get to keep a significant cut of whatever the worker earns or produces in the form of profit. Basically,
so the thing about profit, he has this whole argument that profit is theft generally. But the thing about profit is the reason why that the worker's labor is able to make money is because of the entrepreneur, because of the capitalist who tells them what to do, who tells them how to use their labor to produce profit. Without the organization of the capital owner, without the organization of the entrepreneur, the labor is absolutely worthless. There's no worth to any of that labor. So you need somebody to organize these things. You need somebody to direct the labor in a certain direction. This is the problem with the labor theory of value. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that particular theory in this video. I probably could in another video. There's a video that I'm thinking about responding to that actually goes into this theory of value more. But essentially the problem with it is that labor, apart from direction, apart from telling it what to do, how to use the labor, is worthless. You could try to just like punch a wall a bunch, and that exerts a lot of fucking labor. You're just fucking punching that wall. But you're exerting a lot of labor. What the fuck are you doing? What value are you producing? Maybe you'll knock out a brick that you can sell, but you're not producing any wealth. You need some sort of direction to that labor. Now, some people, they can direct their own labor to become profitable. These are the self-employed people, the entrepreneurs. They can say, oh, I want to go and create a blog or create a YouTube channel or create any of these sort of things. This is an obvious example today with the internet. There's a lot of self-employed people. So those people can direct their labor and produce some sort of profit out of it, just all on their own. Now, some people, they're good at figuring out how to produce labor into profit, but they need laborers. Well, then these are basically the entrepreneurs. They create a business and they hire laborers. And there's some people who don't do either of these things. They have labor, they have the ability to do things, obviously, but they don't, either because they don't want to put in the effort, or either because they don't have any specific ideas about how to use their labor. They go and work for the capital owner, and the capital owner will say, or the entrepreneur will say, I'll pay you this amount of money for your time. And because he'll pay the worker less money than he will get out of the worker, obviously, because he wants to make a profit. But the worker, this money that he is making from the capital owner is worth more than what that laborer can do with his own labor, apart from the capital owner, apart from the entrepreneur directing his labor into profit. So the entrepreneur is very valuable here. He's not exploiting anybody. He's actually making it so that this person's labor can gain them more money for themselves than what would happen if they were just left on their own without the capitalist, without the entrepreneur.
Capitalist bosses steal labor value from workers and transfer that wealth to themselves. In order for capitalist institutions to survive, they have to turn a profit for the capitalists who own them. Otherwise, they'll be forced out of business by more ruthless competitors.
Yeah, but what is profit? What does profit represent? I explained what it represents with regards to workers. It's the fact that you're paying them slightly less than what you're going to make off of their labor. Obviously, but there's no problem with that. Why is there no problem with that? Why is this not exploitation? As I explained earlier, this is not exploitation because you're paying them more money than what they could make if they just went off on their own and used their labor without your direction, without the entrepreneur's direction for the labor, without the entrepreneur's talent of converting the labor into profit. Without the entrepreneur, the labor is worthless. But with the entrepreneur's help, or not necessarily worthless, because anybody can really come up with some sort of way to direct their labor and gain some profit. Like, let's say that there's a laborer. He can make $6 on his own, or he can go to a capitalist and work minimum wage, like $7.20, I think is minimum wage right now. Which I don't necessarily agree with minimum wage, but in this context, it's okay because whatever. Let's say that the capital owner will actually turn a profit on this. I can talk about minimum wage in another video. So he goes to this capital owner. He's like, or to this entrepreneur. He's like, I can earn $6 with my money, with my time, $6 an hour with my labor on my own, or I can go to this capital owner, this entrepreneur, this businessman, who will offer me a job where he pays me $7 an hour. Well, obviously, they're going to take the $7 an hour job because it's in their best interest to do so. And this is the case with every single job in an economy. Because now there's the common argument that, if they don't take the job, they're just going to die. Well, no. Think about what it means if they don't take the job. It means that the capital owner is not paying the businessman. I keep using communist terminology, the capital owner, because I'm listening to this video. But basically, the businessman is paying them more money than what their labor is worth apart from the businessman. But this person can still go and do something with their labor that produces some sort of value. Now, without the businessman, this value is going to be very low and probably not livable on. So the businessman offers them a job that will allow them to live, or that will simply offer them more money than what they could do on their own. And this is a fundamentally moral thing because it is raising the standard of living. It is raising the ability for a person to gain money with their time, which is a fundamentally positive moral thing for both parties involved, because the capital owner is making a profit off of this labor, which is good for him and which is a good thing because it's good to act in your self-interest. And the worker is making more money per hour than what he could make on his own, which is, he in that sense, he's actually exploiting the capital owner by this definition. He's gaining more money than what he could make on his own because of this capital owner. He's gaining more money than what his labor is worth on its own. So but this is the thing, it's a win-win transaction. This is what capitalism is defined by. So what does profit represent? What does profit represent for a capital owner? What does the profit represent for a businessman? It represents this money that's made over the labor. Well, how do they make money at all? How does this person make money at all? Well, they take the resources, they take labor plus land plus all the capital plus all these resources, they take them and they mix them together in some way through creativity, through whatever production process is available to them. They do that, they produce a product that is worth more to individuals than those resources. So they do some act of production that mixes resources in some way and creates some output, and that output is worth more than the inputs. And because of that, they make a profit. The entrepreneur will make a profit based off of this production, based off of this use of their mind to create more value, which is a good thing, and they deserve to be rewarded accordingly. And capitalism rewards them basically exactly through the process of supply and demand and win-win transactions, those sort of things. You can go look into all sorts of economic theories based on this, and the Austrian theory is obviously the best, but just basic supply and demand can explain how things are priced objectively. And there's all sorts of more complicated things besides supply and demand, but that's sort of the fundamental here when it comes to economics. Basically, the idea that each person will buy, or each individual person has a certain demand curve and certain supply curve, and then you have an aggregate supply curve and some aggregate demand curve, and where those intersect is where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied, and that price is the equilibrium price. And if that price is above the cost of the inputs, the capitalist will make a profit, and every single transaction that occurs here is win-win because every single person is willing to pay more for each good, but they pay the price that's offered. So that's a very quick, simple explanation. It would be a lot easier with visuals, but there you go. That's capitalism. That's how capitalism is moral. There you go. That's very simple, but yeah, you go read Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal, and go read Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt to learn more about this. Oh, I made it full screen.
Capitalist institutions literally can't concern themselves with anything but profits, or basically they'll die. Nearly all of the efforts of human civilization are now yoked to the will of capitalists who own the factories, the financial institutions, the mass media, the social networks, the tech companies, the medical and pharmaceutical companies. They own everything.
He listed so many things and said they own everything. Yeah, there's a lot of people. There's a lot more owners than ever before. There's a lot more of these people, which is, I mean, a good thing because individuals are taking control of their lives. Technically, in a capitalist system, everyone is generally an owner of their own labor. That's not the best analogy because that sort of implies self-ownership, which is not a very good theory, but everyone fundamentally has a right to his or her life, and because of that, they can pursue their self-interest based on these rights and they can think for themselves and keep the results of their actions as property. But he listed all these different things which are a result of capitalism. All of these industries that he listed, they weren't really here before the innovation of capitalism. When people were free to use their minds to innovate, when every individual was free to create his own businesses, to create his own innovations, we get all of these innovations. We get all these things that we see in a capitalist society, which is fundamentally a very, very beneficial thing.
So they get to set the agenda for our society.
But he listed so many different people. There's so many different owners. There's it's not as if all the capitalists are in a back smoke room together setting this agenda called the capitalist agenda. That's almost like an alt-right sort of thing there. But obviously non-compete's not an alt-rightist, but I mean, oh no. Oh no. This, the alt-right has the same opinion of the capitalists, that they set the agenda. But who are they? Well, which ethnic groups owns the majority of the resources? Now obviously, the alt-right, the Nick Fuentes types of the world would say, oh, it's the Jews own it all, and this is not this capitalist agenda is actually the Jewish agenda. But now these people are obviously not fascists, they're communists, so they just stop at capitalist. But there's this sort of idea that there's these big capitalists who are setting the agenda and they have all this power to control people's lives. They don't have the ability to use force. All of their power comes from voluntary trade. But here, let's keep on going.
And what kind of agenda do capitalists have? Well, it's actually really simple. Capitalism steers humanity toward one end and one end only: ever-increasing profits for capitalists. See, capitalists don't really care about the welfare of workers or protecting the environment. They can't, because those things aren't profitable.
Sure, because it's complete. Or hold up, let's hear the two things.
Welfare of workers or protecting
the welfare of workers. So yeah, you can just pay a worker whatever price you want, I guess. No, that's fundamentally wrong. As I explained earlier, workers have their own value apart from the capitalist owner. So you have to provide more value to people. You have to provide more value to gain more value. So that's why capitalism is a productive system. But yes, it is fundamentally good for people to pursue their own happiness. This is why I'm an objectivist. It's fundamentally moral for a capitalist, for a businessman, to pursue his self-interest in this context, to make his own life better. That is one of the most moral things that someone can do. Now, the destruction of the environment, we can get into that issue. I tend to divide this into two sort of problems. The problem of greenhouse gases and global warming, or climate change now, I guess, and the problem of pollution. Well, the problem of pollution can be solved, but if anyone knows much about the tragedy of the commons, I'd recommend you look that up. Basically, it's the idea that collective property gets abused more, gets exploited more than private property, because there is no incentives for the collective to keep that property good unless it is their own property. The only incentive they have is just to exploit as much as possible, get as much as they can short term. But when it's private property, when they have private property rights, they have the ability to own it long term, and they treat it better. So if property is privately owned, we would see a lot less pollution, because people would have an incentive to not exploit the world, not exploit their land. And if you did pollute something, well, then you'd be destroying somebody else's property, and then that's using force. So government gets involved and arrests that person. You can sue them. You can do all those sort of things. Now, you have to be able to prove that there is an objective harm based on this, a direct objective harm based on this. Now, you can't say that, like, oh, because there's going to be a little bit more smog in the air because of industrialization. You can't. That's not a sort of thing that's not a sort of sacrifice that, or that's not a sort of pollution that we can control, because it requires the force on other people, and this is a necessary side effect of the great raises of standard of living that comes from industrialization, and it's a necessary side effect of it. So that's one other thing as well. But if there is an objective pollutant that objectively causes harm and can be proven in a court of law, then obviously there should be fines. There should be, because you're damaging someone else's property. Now, the whole global warming example, there's a lot of different things that we can do capitalism-wise to solve this problem. One would be deregulating nuclear energy, because nuclear energy is not a major pollutant like fossil fuels generally are considered to be. But one thing that we cannot do is sacrifice fossil fuels, sacrifice our only source of cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy. We need energy to live. Sacrificing good energy for these renewable energy sources that are very unreliable. You can do a lot more research into this. I'd highly recommend looking into some of Alex Epstein's work on this particular issue. We can't replace fossil fuels right now. That is our only source of cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy. And it would cause a lot more death if we sacrifice those things than the ocean raising a few centimeters. Or actually, I don't know how specifically how many it's supposed to raise. I agree with the scientific consensus. However, I think that the goal should be to not use force on people and prevent as much and lead to as much human flourishing as possible. Human life is the standard, not the environment apart from human life. That's an important point here. We need cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy. We need that thing. We need energy. Now, there might be problems that come due to global warming, but we can solve those individually. Individuals have the ability to go and figure out solutions to these things. We can do things with insurance with relation to the oceans rising. We can do a lot of different things in this regard. Another thing we can, there's going to be a lot more farmland in like Siberia and Canada if the temperatures rise. Now there's obviously going to be harms as well. I'm not super educated on the whole global warming thing, so I generally just go with the scientific consensus and say, hey, this is what the scientists are saying, so let's find solutions to that without using force on people and without destroying our only source of cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy, fossil fuels. Because we need energy. Energy runs the country. Energy is behind every single act of production, really. You need it for just about any business heavily relies on energy. And when we don't have good energy, it's going to lead to massive problems, skyrocketing prices, lower production, less jobs, all of these different problems. There's going to be less production in general. It's going to destroy the economy if we don't have cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy. If we rely on these unreliable, costly resources like solar, wind, those sort of things. And the ultimate solution would just be to free up the economy, free up nuclear, and eventually nuclear will replace fossil fuels. I think it would be a good alternative eventually, but we just got to give it time, because we can't use force here. We can't force these sort of developments, because that comes at the cost of individuals' pursuit of happiness, of an individual's ability to pursue his own life, to pursue his own values, and make his own judgments about what is best for him in life, or for her as well. Someone in the comment section of one of my other videos was annoyed that I kept using the word him and man and those sort of things. It's really just because I read a lot of philosophy, and they use man and his, her, and his he, him pronouns all throughout most philosophy things that I have read. And also Spanish has led me to generally heading towards the masculine form when it's ambiguous. So, but that is what it is. That's not too important for the rest of this. So let's jump back into this video. I think we're about halfway done now with the video. I've explained a lot, so this second half will probably go a little quicker.
In the environment, they can't, because those things aren't profitable. Capitalism doesn't allow for businesses to be driven by ethics or morals or scruples. Only building profits will allow a company to survive. Anything that
but once again, I already established that profits can only come off of win-win transactions with people, off of transactions that meet people's demands, meet people's needs, the things that people want, that provide for people's values. So capitalism is
reduces profit.
Capitalism is a pragmatic system as well as a moral system. It works in reality as well, as I've explained throughout this video.
Profitability is inherently harmful to a capitalist entity. Sure, sometimes profitability does line up with good causes. Sometimes it's cheaper to be more environmentally sustainable, for instance, or maybe...
It is, though. That's like, he gave me a point. He gave me a whole ass point now. It is sometimes cheaper to be more environmentally sustainable. Like if you can use less energy to produce something, if you can use less fossil fuels to create the same amount of energy, that's good. That's very profitable. And that's actually why from what I heard from an Alex Epstein podcast, Power Hour, one week, this is why some businesses are like, oh, these environmental regulations, we'll conform to them, that's fine, and they're basically accepting them and not really protesting them, because it's like, if we can produce as more energy for the same amount of fossil fuels, or the same amount of energy with less fossil fuels, that's good. That's going to increase production. Now, obviously, these people are being short-sighted, because the overall agenda is to put them out of business and to destroy cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy. They're the fossil fuel industry. But so it can be good to reduce emissions. There is a profit incentive to do so. So good point, NonCompete. Thank you for that. Love you, man.
Be donating to a charity will net a big fat tax break for the capitalist, or maybe it's just good marketing to support a worthy cause.
So the thing about charity is it's better for them to be able to reinvest it back in their company. So the fact that tax incentives make them donate to charity, well, think about what would happen if there weren't these tax incentives. If they just already got this tax cut anyway, they would invest it back in their business, which is inherently more productive than the charity, because the charity, obviously, it's not a terrible thing, obviously, but it just gives it to people who are just going to use that money and just going to consume. But what reinvesting in the company does is it leads to more long-term economic growth, which leads to generally more economic prosperity throughout the country for everybody. So I would argue that reinvestment is more beneficial than charity. That investment in a company. Now, charities, I'm fine with charity. I find charity to be a very moral thing. More moral than welfare, obviously, because charity can say, I'm not going to give it to you people that are like the wife-beating drunks and the unproductive people who shouldn't be prosperous, who shouldn't have any sort of wealth, but they can give it to the hard worker who unjustly fell behind, which those are real people as well. Those are people who we should donate to charity too, and charity has the ability to discriminate between the two.
But this is all just incidental. Don't be fooled for a moment into believing that capitalism cares about the welfare of society. It's all about the profit. Keep in mind that there are only two.
And there's no problem with that. Self-interest is moral, and I mean this is fundamentally where I'm probably going to lose a lot of people here, because well, if you're just watching this and don't already know objectivism, but fundamentally, your only moral duty is to yourself. It's not to society. You only have one life. You only have your own happiness. And your mind can only think for itself and make its own individual judgments. You can't force happiness onto anybody. And there's a sort of lack of pride that comes with taking handouts and taking those sort of things. Now, capitalism does benefit the economy. It is prosperous. It does lead to, it is a pragmatic thing. But that's not why it's moral. It's not moral because it benefits society, because it's good for the common good. It's moral because it allows individuals to pursue their own self-interest and set their own values without taking into account the common good. Now, it does benefit the common good, which is awesome, which is a great consequence of that, because I like people, I like society, I like the common good. But fundamentally, my life is more important. My freedom is more important. My ability to achieve happiness is more important than the common good. Now, by doing so in a capitalist society, I actually do benefit the common good, which is a very good side effect, I would argue, because I don't know if I could live with myself knowing that I'm just destroying people and killing people for wealth. No, I definitely wouldn't, because I didn't earn that wealth. I don't deserve that wealth. And there's a sort of lack of pride that comes with that, knowing that I actually do not deserve to live. I never earned life. And that leads to a lack of pride, that leads to very, very unfulfilling lives. But let us keep on moving with this video.
Two ways to increase profits. A company can either increase prices for consumers or reduce costs. Competition tends to put a hard limit on what a business can charge, so as businesses become more powerful, they will always seek to eliminate competition and create monopolies so that they can charge consumers as much as possible to maximize company profits.
But they can never sustain these monopolies without force. They can create monopolies for a time, but if they start exploiting people, if they start hurting people by raising prices, exploiting consumers, doing all these bad things, bad business practices that are damaging to society at large, then some competitor will come up and take their place. If just look at history, this always happens. I mean, you can think about all the monopolies in history, and all of them, if they did bad things, they generally got put out of business. This always happened. Like, you can even think about, even before antitrust laws came into place, I think Rockefeller only had like 20% of the market share. So like, and I defend Rockefeller as well. I think Rockefeller wasn't as bad as people argue he was, but that's besides the point. Most monopolies, most things that are considered monopolies throughout history, they went out of business because of competition. That's what capitalism allows. The only real monopolies that can exist can exist for a long duration of time and can exploit people and can do harm to people, are the ones that are given government monopolies. You can think about the rating agencies, for example, in the 2008 housing crisis. Those were given government monopolies. Those were the only companies. There were only a certain amount of companies that could give ratings to these companies. This is something I've heard from Yaron Brook. You can go fact check me if I've misstated anything. Please go fact check me, because you can go learn a lot more about this thing. And if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. But I do think I'm right on this, because I remember looking into these sort of things. So, but anytime that I make any sort of claim about anything, go look it up. Please do, and correct me if I'm wrong. But anyways, the thing with government monopoly, or with monopolies, is they can only be sustained and they can only exploit people if they're backed by force, if they're backed by the government, the gun. So that's the only time monopolies can be sustained. I'm sure, obviously, monopolies can come into existence, and there's no real problem with that, because they can only be monopolies in a free system by being the absolute best at what they do, by providing so much value to society and so much value to my life and other people's life, that no one can really compete. Look at Amazon, for example. Look at how great Amazon is. Look at how amazing the product that Amazon provides is. I don't even have to leave my house. I can just go order all these fucking books. Look at all that stuff. I can go order those books online. Say, hey, deliver these to my house. And send. 2 days later, I got a new book on my shelf. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing. I love Amazon. And if you don't love Amazon, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, man.
Comes to driving down costs, the primary cost for almost every business is human labor. As such, capitalist businesses are always seeking to pay workers as little as possible or just eliminate them through things like automation to drive down wages as much as they can get away with.
Sure, but all these things, they still, like, you can still quit the business if they're not paying you as much as your labor is actually worth. You can always do that and go find another business that's going to offer you more. And the thing with automation is going to lead to more growth of the economy, and it's going to lead to more jobs being produced and more businesses being created. Just look at history for this. Just look at every time that things are automated. There's some harms, obviously. There's some little issues with it, but then people can move to a different job. You're not entitled to a job. That's important. This person is providing you a job. There's someone this entrepreneur, this businessman, he's providing this job for you. And because of that, you can't say that, oh, I'm entitled to this much of it. I'm entitled to this portion of it. No, if they're offering you a win-win trade here. They're offering you more money than what your labor is worth apart from them, apart from their direction. And because of that, you're not entitled to this job. And if they find a way to automate it, well, then it's on you to go and train yourself for a different job or find some different job or create a different job. Your life is not something that is simply given to you by other people. Life is something that must be self-sustained. Only the individual can use his mind, and the mind is your means of survival. And because of that, there's no collective mind. There's no collective mind. And because of that, like, you have to use your own individual mind to pursue your own individual life. And anything else requires force. It requires you to be a parasite on another man. And that use of force is fundamentally immoral because it requires a subversion of another man's mind for your own. Or a woman's mind as well. I love women. Women can be prosperous as well. I literally listened to a woman philosopher. Ayn Rand, the greatest philosopher of all time, by the way. But let's keep going.
Naturally, this leads to tremendous accumulation of wealth for the capitalist class and ever-increasing wealth inequality between workers and capitalists. By definition, capitalism will always
I covered wealth inequality earlier in the video.
Lead to the rich getting richer and the poor getting way more poor. A lot of folks try to argue that capitalism can
That's not true, though. The poor don't get way more poor. That's absolutely untrue. The poor their standard of living gets raised more and more. Just look at history. It's so obvious. How much do you have to evade? How much do you have to turn your mind away from the greatness of the Industrial Revolution and all the standard of living raises that have occurred throughout history because of capitalism? It's so obvious. I don't get how people can be so blind to this.
Reformed, that capitalists can be restrained through regulation and legislation that would put limits on the abuses capitalists can make to the people of the world and to our environment.
I mean, those are just the middle of the roaders who want to sacrifice capitalism a little bit, who want to sacrifice the moral system a little bit because they don't trust the human mind. They're like, oh, let's just regulate it a little bit. And I mean, no, regulation is always fundamentally bad because it sets a restriction on the mind. It sets a restriction on an individual's ability to make his own judgments about reality, about how to live his life. And by doing that, you're making life this sort of collectivized thing where your life simply belongs to society and you can't pursue your life in a certain way.
This liberal position cruelly ignores the fact that even the most effective
Oh yeah, the communist the disdain for the liberals. Oh man, I love it.
Regulations and reforms do nothing to correct the power imbalances of society.
Everyone hates the centrists. It's time for the centricide, baby.
Such reforms are destined to be inadequate because they don't disrupt who ultimately holds the power in the system. As long as capitalists hold the reins of the means of production, they will always hold virtually limitless power over society. Another major myth about capitalism is the idea of meritocracy. Capitalist propaganda seeks to convince us that hard work and good ideas will rise to the top and that anyone can become a rich capitalist if they're willing to play the game. Unfortunately, that game is severely rigged, such that for every worker who does manage to break into the capitalist caste of billionaires, there are millions of workers who suffer and toil in misery from the cradle to the grave.
Sure, not everybody can get to the top. That's obvious. But the thing is, like, the people who can direct their labor to make profit and can direct other people's labor to make profit, those are the people who end up owning the businesses and end up being productive. And people generally get rewarded for their win-win transactions. That's the only way you can make profit. So now it's not always going to be a meritocracy. Some people will fall unjustly behind. That's true. And it especially happens even more when people are allowed to use force to get to the top. The sort of, what's the word? The James Taggart types. I don't know a better word for it. But basically the people who, there is another word for it. The people who are in bed with the government, the looters. I think that might be the word. I had a complete brain fart, but I know the word. I just can't think of it now. But yeah, it's basically the people who are in bed with the government. They can use force to who can force their way to the top and hold their position of power and force other people who want to come up down. This is how a lot of big businesses stay near the top. They lobby for regulations, and regulations inherently hurt smaller businesses more than they hurt big businesses, because these big businesses, they can afford to deal with these regulations. And they write the regulations in such a way that it crushes the smaller businesses and crushes the workers and crushes all these people. So the fact that these big businessmen who are in bed with the government have the gun on their side, have the ability to use force to sustain their power, is fundamentally immoral. And I would advocate for more capitalism. I would advocate for a real laissez-faire capitalist system where the government and economics are completely separated, for a separation of economics and state in the same way and for the same reasons as the separation of church and state.
Some folks say that if we got rid of capitalism, universal laziness would take over society and nobody would work anymore because there'd be no incentive. This position ignores the fact that
that's certainly the case. Like, people would be less incentivized to work, but fundamentally, there is a moral fact involved here that people are not allowed to pursue their own values. Their values are set by a government. What they are supposed to do, what they're allowed to do, how much they can achieve in their life is set by a government or some central authority. Now, I think NonCompete is technically a libertarian socialist, so the problem here would be just the collective. It'd be the ability of the collective to set individual values for people. And that's generally the main problem with the government being involved too, because the government sort of embodies this collective, and it is the voice of the collective and says that here's what you must do. Here's what individual values you must pursue.
Capitalist society, the people who work the hardest make the least amount of money, and the people with the greatest fortunes, the capitalists, live out their days in luxurious laziness.
This is such a materialistic view of labor and what creates production. What creates value is the mind. It's not brute force. Man is not an animal. Man is not this animal that uses brute force to achieve his values. He uses his mind. So the fact that these industrialists don't put in like this hard-working effort in the fields, and the people who do, they don't make as much money as the capitalists, that shows that there's this fundamental lack of understanding of what produces real value. What produces real value is the human mind. It's the ability of a human being to use his rational faculty to set his values and to pursue them based off that, and to use his rational faculty to decide how to pursue those values. That is what produces value, is the human mind. It's not brute force. It's not labor. The human mind is what produces values. And this lack of understanding is obvious in the labor theory of value and in this sort of explanation and analysis of capitalism.
Capitalism is an engine that robs wealth from the working people of the world and transfers it to a small number of capitalists who feel entitled to our money. It had its time and place in history. It was admittedly a great step forward from feudalism, but it's outworn its usefulness, and now's the time for capitalism to be
useful for whom? Is the value of something determined by society? Does society say, individual rights, they were useful for a while, but now that they're not, let's enslave everybody again. Let's say that everybody is just going to be sacrificed to the collective because, capitalism is not useful for us anymore. I mean, what a terrible view of of economic systems. It's sort of this view that Rand talks about, where it's like, oh, there's this social surplus and we must find a way to divide it out. Or there's this great pie and we must, the job of a society, the job of the economic system of a society is to find the right way to cut up this pie into the best, the most proportionate slices that reward people on their productivity. There's no pie. There's no social surplus. None of these things exist. There's only individual surplus. Only individuals with their own pies. I have my apple pie. You have your pumpkin pie. Someone else has their blueberry pie. Actually, I want the blueberry pie. I'll trade my apple pie with somebody's blueberry pie. Blueberry pie is delicious. I love it. But this is sort of I think this analogy comes from Yaron Brook. Probably. I've heard it comes from Yaron Brook. I don't know if I've definitely heard him say it before. Never mind. Yeah, that analogy comes from Yaron Brook. So if you're watching this video, go check out Yaron Brook.
Dismantled so that humanity can fulfill our true potential. There's a lot more to be said about capitalism. In my next video, we'll talk more about wages and profits and how capitalists steal the labor value of workers, so click subscribe if you want to stick around for that. In the meantime, you can check out my blog.
Ooh, maybe I can respond to that video too.
Blog at non-compete.com, where I have a lot more articles about stuff like this. I'm American Johnson. This is NonCompete. Thanks for watching.
I love his name, American Johnson. That's funny as fuck. Oh man. But yeah, sweet. That was a nice hour-long video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed talking about that video. I felt like I got a lot of good things out there. And talking about it has really clarified a lot of these issues for me, actually. So yeah, I'm excited for you guys to all watch this video and go subscribe. If you enjoyed this and want to see me be motivated to do more, if you're getting any value from this, go trade me some value for value on my Patreon down below, link in the description, and go subscribe. Please subscribe. Yo, if I can get more subscribers, someday I can debate Non-Compete. I can debate Destiny. I can debate Vosh. I can debate anyone I want. But right now, 340 subscribers, 341 now, I think. Somewhere around there. Right now, I can't. So I need you right now watching this video, go down, click that red subscribe button, and make a comment about how cringe this video was, because I know you're a fucking communist. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next motherfucking video, baby. Peace.